You've heard it said that seeing is believing, but that is not always the case. Jesus talked of those who see but do not perceive, and indeed who hear but do not understand. The bare facts of Easter, the empty tomb, the linen clothes lying where Jesus' body had been, the things that could be seen were in and of themselves not enough to enable everyone to grasp what had happened, to perceive and understand that Jesus is alive. I want to look at two people who in our gospel reading were more perceptive and showed more understanding than the others who just remained confused by it all. The two people I want us to think about are John, the beloved disciple, and Mary Magdalene, to be precise. Something about these two people led them to understand what God was doing on that first Easter morning. Firstly then, to John. This is the same person who at the Last Supper rested his head on Jesus' chest as they reclined at table together. When Jesus was dying on a cross, it was John that Jesus asked to look after his mother, to be like a son to her, to care for her, and she for him. Some years later, when John wrote his account of the good news of Jesus Christ, he would describe himself not as John the disciple, not as John the evangelist, nor even John the apostle. His primary identity, his most coherent sense of himself, was that he was the one whom Jesus loved, the disciple whom Jesus loved. He was the one who lay his head on Jesus' breast, who listened to his heartbeat, who knew himself to be loved. So this is the man who, along with Peter, ran to the empty tomb. The word used for run towards is the same root as that used for a road race, a sprint. It is the same word that St. Paul used when he said that we should run in such a way that we win the race. This was not a jog or a shuffle or a fast walk. John and Peter raced to the tomb. Now, gentlemen in the Middle East do not run. Most of the time they walk at a slow, dignified pace. But this was urgent. Mary Magdalene had told them they've taken the Lord out of the tomb. She didn't say who the they were. It could be grave robbers or the Jewish authorities, who knows? But they had to get there. They had to see it for themselves. Of course, being younger and fitter, John reached the tomb first. But he held back. He didn't go in. He just peered into the tomb from outside. All the time, he was trying to take it in. John, remember, had logged certain things that Jesus had said. What had Jesus meant when he said, "A little while and you will no longer see me"? And again, "A little while and you will see me." Jesus had said, "Very truly, I tell you, you will weep and mourn, but the world will rejoice. You will have pain, but your pain will turn into joy." The disciples hadn't really understood all of this. But now John was wondering, was this somehow all part of that? His thoughtful reading of the situation would have been interrupted by the sound of Peter, poor old Peter, puffing and panting, and then shooting straight past him, running into the tomb. John carefully, quietly followed him in. There were the linen cloths lying there. No grave robber was responsible for all this, for they would have taken the body still wrapped. And anyway, these clothes were worth something. They wouldn't have left them behind. And the authorities would not have stripped Jesus of his grave clothes and then folded them up and placed them where the body had lain. It was as if they had been put to one side, as if they were no longer needed. Just like when Lazarus had emerged from the tomb, his hands and his feet bound with strips of cloth and his face wrapped in a cloth, and Jesus had said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." All these things were churning over in John's mind, but it still didn't make any sense to Peter. He just went home confused, trying to take it in. However, John, who'd seen the selfsame things as Peter, saw and believed. Absolutely believed. The word he used means to trust, to have confidence, to have faith, to be assured. At that moment, he saw and perceived, he understood, and in perceiving and understanding, he believed. That was John. What about Mary? Now, firstly, we have to say something about who Mary was, or more importantly, who she wasn't. Mary was not Martha's sister, for that Mary lived in Bethany, not Magdala. She was not the penitent prostitute. She's mentioned on roughly the same page, but the prostitute is actually unnamed. She was not Jesus' mistress, lover, or wife. So who was she? Well, the first thing that we know about her was that Jesus healed and restored her. Mary had been suffering from quite a severe case of demon possession. Mark and Luke both tell us that 7 demons were cast out of her. 7 demons. However we might interpret that today in terms of mental or physical illness, her situation had been as desperate as you can imagine. Yet Jesus loved her. He had compassion for her. Time and time and again, the Gospels speak of Jesus' compassion. His compassion for the crowd because they're harassed and helpless. His compassion for the sick. His compassion for the woman who'd lost her only son. His compassion for the hungry. His compassion for the blind. And when Jesus saw someone like Mary whose life had fallen apart, he had compassion for her. He loved her. And Mary was healed, restored, forgiven. She was able to live a new life, free from all that had enslaved her in the past. She was quite literally born again, able to live again, able to love and feel joy and peace. So what did she do with this newfound freedom? She gave herself completely, totally, entirely to the service of her Lord. She was perhaps the most constant, the most faithful of all Christ's disciples. When the others ran away, Mary stayed. When the others had given up, Mary remained. When fear had gripped the other disciples, Mary's heart was still full of love for her Lord. She gave herself to Jesus emotionally, being alongside him in his sufferings, standing with him at the hour of his death, weeping for him as his body lay buried in a tomb. Mary was a member of a remarkable group of people who, alongside the disciples, played a vital part in Jesus' ministry. Luke tells us the 12 were with Jesus, as well as some women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Herod's servant Chusa, and Susanna and many others who provided for them out of their resources. Mary was among those who funded the mission of Jesus. And on that first Easter morning, it was Mary who had gone to the garden out of love for her Lord. She went to anoint him, to prepare his body for burial, to do things properly for the one whom she loved. But the tomb was empty and the body had gone. And Mary believed the worst until, having returned to the tomb, she heard his voice. "Mary," Jesus said to her. Now, when John in his Gospel has referred to Mary before, he has called her Maria, the normal Greek rendering of her name. But Jesus, when he spoke with her, used the Hebrew form of her name, Miriam. And that is how John then records it. Is it how Jesus always referred to her? And therefore, is he just calling her by her own familiar name? There is a resonance with Isaiah chapter 43. "Do not be afraid, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." Miriam. That may be it. But maybe Jesus is recognizing the role that Mary has performed before, during, and after his death. Miriam, the Hebrew form, is the same name as Miriam, the sister of Moses. It was that Miriam who looked after Moses when, as a baby, he was floated in a basket on the river and was then adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. It was Miriam who arranged for Moses to have a Hebrew nurse so that he was raised a Hebrew and could one day lead his people to freedom. It was Miriam who, when God's people had fled from Egypt, took up her tambourine and sang, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously." Did Jesus have this Miriam in mind when he called Mary Magdalene Miriam? And Miriam Magdala in Hebrew means Miriam the towering one, the fortress, the stronghold. Is it at this point that plain old Mary from Magdala became the faithful prophet, the strong tower, the agent and celebrant of God's amazing victory? I'm tempted by these ideas. But as I read this encounter with Jesus in the garden, then it's the intimacy that strikes me most. And the use of the word in Hebrew just seems to add to that sense of intimacy. "Miriam," says Jesus. "Rabboni," she replies. "My dear teacher," she says. And at that moment, that precious moment, Mary realized that something mighty, something powerful, something incredible has happened. "I've seen the Lord," said Mary. What was it then that led John and Mary to perceive and understand and to believe that Jesus was alive, that he'd risen from the dead? Perhaps it was something to do with the intimacy, the closeness of their relationship to Jesus. John had rested his head on Jesus' breast. He'd heard his heart beating. He'd felt his warmth. And Mary was named in all four Gospels as one who followed Jesus closely. And she remained with him by his side even when the others had run away. Intimacy is certainly one factor. But so was being loved. John was so aware of this that he described himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Mary had received healing and compassion. Her life had been transformed by the loving and powerful intervention of Jesus. Being loved would certainly have something to do with it. But maybe it also has something to do with faith. Somehow they were able to understand that although Jesus had died, he'd now somehow shot out the other side. He'd emerged the other side of death, a different person and yet the same. Still Jesus, but not as he was. Not weak or frail, but strong and powerful, able to do much more because God had done something new. And they would come to see that when Jesus burst out of that tomb, when he rose again from the dead, he changed this world forever. He changed everything. He changed death, which many had believed was a dead end. He changed it from a destination into a departure lounge for something new, something everlasting, something much more worthy of being called life than anything we have ever experienced. He changed sin, the wrong things we do. He changed sin from being a prison that traps us and from which we can never escape into being something much more like a spent force, incapable of wielding power over us. He changed the whole landscape of our lives, for everything became charged with new life. Our whole world is pregnant with novelty, ripe with the potential for change, ready to be transformed. Perhaps for John and for Mary, it wasn't a case of seeing as believing, but actually of believing and then being able to see. May we share our insights and believe that we may see. So may God draw you ever closer to himself. May you feel his heartbeat and know yourself to be loved. And may you know and see and believe ever more deeply, ever more clearly, that Jesus Christ is risen from the dead, that love is eternal and life is immortal, and God has indeed triumphed gloriously. Amen.